Thank you. So my presentation today is titled Rehabilitation Research or Stakeholder Engagement, Rehabilitation Research and Example. And via this presentation today, I'll discuss stakeholder engagement and also an example of engagement principles in action, which will integrate already some of the wonderful discussion that came up in the Q&A and throughout Dr. Leland's presentation as well. Next slide. So first, I'll just start with a disclosure of our funding and my conflicts of interest, which are none. Next slide. And start with a discussion of stakeholders. And as we now know, right, stakeholders represent a variety of constituencies that do have a stake in generating useful and relevant healthcare research evidence. So from this perspective, when we engage stakeholders, it's important for us to understand that stakeholders do represent a range and diversity of perspectives, experiences, as well as familiarity with research and trust in both healthcare and the research enterprise as a whole. Next slide. So with this lens and understanding, an approach to stakeholder engagement that champions transparency and power sharing is necessary for equitable collaboration with stakeholders. We know that there are many historically underrepresented groups in research, such as across demographics like race, ethnicity, or socioeconomic status, identities, age, sex, and gender, just to name a few. Often the personal experiences of stakeholders or those around them may have also been marked by systemic inequity, racism, and disparities, for example. This is especially likely when we consider historically marginalized groups in research, such as communities of color, LGBTQ+ populations, persons with disabilities, etc. And so it's imperative for investigators to understand best practices for leading and also fostering collaborations that are non-tokenistic and that are equitable, sustainable, and transparent. Part of this approach is that research leadership I was mentioning before that readily shares power with non-researchers, inclusive of those who have been historically underrepresented in the research enterprise, so that meaningful and sustainable engagement can help us produce research findings that reflect the realities of stakeholders' everyday lives or priorities and can be more readily adopted or implemented into care. You can also imagine that probably the opposite could be true, that absent or low quality engagement may actually exacerbate or continue to perpetuate disparities in research participation and health outcomes, which brings us back full circle to authentic and meaningful engagement as a potential solution. Next slide. So today you heard from Dr. Leland's presentation that we participated in a study about the right care for the right patient at the right time, a resident in nursing home care. I'm going to delve further into this PCORI-funded study and give you some examples of how the research engagement principles guided our study. So the composition of the advisory committee was, as you heard earlier, composed of a variety of perspectives. We engaged a range of practitioners and staff members that engage with nursing home residents with dementia, including rehabilitation disciplines, for example, but also staff members with a variety of perspectives. So for example, we have a member who has expertise in dining services. We also engaged a researcher and policymakers to give us that broader perspective, and health organizations leadership, such as stakeholders with expertise in nursing home administration, regulations, or clinical operations, for example. And most importantly, we engaged caregivers and patients as their voice is key in this whole research question. So to represent patients, we engaged a patient advocate from a national advocacy organization to represent the perspective of nursing home residents with dementia. But we also consider the perspectives of caregivers, both formal, so in this case, a certified nursing assistant, for example, and informal as a family caregiver. Next slide. So now going back to those engagement principles we talked about earlier. I'll first address reciprocal relationships, which involves clear roles and decision-making. So in our case, we engaged our advisory committee early on to develop the application and conceptualize a preliminary plan. Part of this included an in-person kickoff meeting that was held at the beginning of our study, which brought the advisory committee and the research team together. As the research team, we felt strongly that this process would give us the opportunity to build relationships, help us jointly identify reasonable expectations, and form a culture of shared leadership, as well as also give us a space to articulate clear guidelines for our collaboration. So in preparation and during the in-person kickoff meeting, we developed a stakeholder charter. And this is a key governance document for the entirety of our stakeholder engagement. And for those of you that may not be familiar with a charter, typically a charter is a governance document for a committee or a board, for example, that outlines the main purpose and objectives of this group. It may include their mission statement or charge and operating procedures, including how members work together to fulfill their committees, for example, or groups' goals. This may also include more kind of tangible items such as meeting frequency, how meeting agendas are handled, and so on and so forth. So in the charter for our study, we address domains relevant to governance and our stakeholder engagement. This included items like participation expectations, meeting procedures, compensation for time spent on project activities, procedures for onboarding new members, committee membership, and even methods for dissemination of our project information or findings. So we used part of our kickoff meeting to have our advisory committee members review documents, discuss the topic, provide feedback, and ultimately lead us to a final draft that was approved by all in the study to be our governance document. Next slide. Next, in terms of partnerships, which involves us valuing contributions of all stakeholders and showing this through our actions. For us, this in-person kickoff meeting in our charter helped us start that discussion, or continue, I should say, that discussion of reasonable expectations and also requests for time and value. So for example, our charter included a requirement for participation that the advisory committee members help guide, as you heard earlier, even in terms of when to show up for a meeting and all of that. In the charter, this was all specified and helped us really understand and outline not just participation, but ultimately payment as well. And the kickoff meeting also helped us find common ground in terms of the research question, and also understand and identify how we were going to refer to each other, our first names, and how we connect to the study. And especially, knowing that our stakeholders represent a wide range of formal education or experiences with research and their everyday work, this was especially important for us to set that tone from the beginning. And this has also helped us to establish a culture and attitude that values that there's something to learn from everyone. And we achieve more together, and that we value inclusivity. And an example of this is one of our informal caregivers was actually quite, had questions about integrating into the study and was initially intimidated, but after these one-on-one conversations and support, this actually went away, and they expressed really how valuable this was for them. So in terms of our study infrastructure, something else that we've done in terms of partnership has been also proactively identify and consider barriers to participation. So for the in-person kickoff meeting, we considered really travel. And so we held the meeting in a location closer to most stakeholders, something that was accessible for people with different mobility needs, and also provided funding for travel and lodging, understanding that not everybody was going to have the same flexibility or resources in terms of travel, time off, et cetera. And this actually was very successful and helped us achieve 100% participation. We also thought about the 3 time zones, which we are all across. And so we decided collaboratively how we were going to make those meetings feasible. And so for us, we hold our monthly meetings, but they occur 3 times a month. at different times and dates of the week. And these times and dates stay constant each month. And so this gives our stakeholders the opportunity to attend a time and day that is most convenient for them. We also plan these meetings out a year in advance, so they have a calendar for the next year of meetings and are able to plan their busy schedules and integrate, hopefully, our meetings into that schedule as well. And our stipends are also part of how we demonstrate how much we value their contribution. And in addition to that, to support stakeholders with limited research experience or resources, we offer one-on-one support, preparatory meetings as needed, and continue to check in with them on an ongoing basis to just kind of see how things are going. Next slide. In terms of transparency, honesty, and trust, our early engagement has helped us set a fine collaboration and foundation for this. And one of our most useful vehicles for enhancing the transparency and honesty and trust in our study has been not just the study charter, but also the use of a biannual survey. This survey is sent out every 6 months to our advisory committee members, and we ask them to provide us feedback about their experience as research partners. We analyze as the research team their results and report them back to them during our monthly meetings. And we talk about the things that went well that we're going to continue to do, but also the concerns that they raised and our tangible plan for addressing this. One example was even on our earlier surveys where we were using an online platform, that the survey showed that there was a technology gap among our stakeholders and knowledge of how to use it. And so in response, we created an education plan and resources to help our stakeholders navigate our online platform for communication, which was very successful. Next slide. And lastly, the engagement principle of co-learning. This focuses on really helping our stakeholders understand research, but also as researchers, learning about engagement. And so for our advisory committee, we introduce research topics to familiarize our stakeholders throughout the study and our monthly meetings. So for example, we've had meetings dedicated to the concept of stakeholder engagement, how data could be analyzed, what manuscripts or conference presentations are, and also even share research articles that are out there that we think might be of interest to the advisory committee or have even been sent in by other members of the committee that they wanted to share with others. We also closely monitor our language to help us be as jargon-free as possible and present complex ideas as easily as we can. And that biannual survey continues to give us more information about where it is that we need to go next. As researchers, we're also committed to learning about engagement. So for example, we've dedicated our time to learning about the topic and sharing what we've learned through publications, and presentations, for example, that our stakeholders have also been a part of. And we continue to learn by constant communication and that feedback from surveys. So for example, during the COVID-19 pandemic, the early stages specifically, our advisory committee was key in just talking to us and sharing with us what they were experiencing on the front lines. And at the same time, the advisory committee structure provided a place for them to feel supported and heard, and find a community as well. And that helped us understand how to best meet their needs and dial back some of the requests for time, for example, and help meet them where they were at that point in time. Next slide. And so lastly, even through some of these examples, hopefully you can see that our stakeholder engagement approach has been quite comprehensive. And so I just want to highlight one key feature to our success that has been recognizing the need to invest in stakeholder engagement and develop an infrastructure for it within our study. So we agreed that this was something as a research team that we were interested in, and this was something that we wanted to champion. And so in our study, we've embedded a dedicated co-investigator whose role is the development and maintenance of engagement. And so this is the role that I play in this study. As part of my role, I oversee the processes I discussed earlier and generally manage communications and relationships between our different groups. I'm the point person for contact and messaging to streamline organizational procedures and messaging. And I also provide direct support to our stakeholders as needed, for example. And so I continue to take care of these tasks as well to manage all of our relationships and engagement procedures. Next slide. So in conclusion, I just want to share this statement with you, which I thought was something that encapsulates nicely our collaboration. This was a statement that came about during our in-person kickoff meeting, where we asked our advisory committee to brainstorm a collective purpose statement. We asked them to consider how do they see their role in this study in our partnership. So this is what they came up with. And this statement has continued to be our compass for engagement in our collaboration. And so I hope this is helpful for you as well as you think about the power of stakeholder engagement. Next slide. And so I just want to leave you with some resources. Picori has a great engagement tool and resource repository that you may be interested in. And we're also, we have some publications in development as well that will give you some of the, help you with, learn more about our charter, for example, and survey as well. Thank you.